Is TikTok really about to be banned in the United States? Do you know that without intervention from the Supreme Court in the next several days, it appears the Chinese-owned social media platform might really get shut down? That's a huge deal. Back on April 24th, President Biden signed the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary-Controlled Applications Act into law. Now, this was crammed into a larger piece of legislation that provided military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Something that passed with broad bipartisan support. In terms of TikTok, the bill stipulated that it would be banned within 270 days unless its Chinese owner, ByteDance, sold the business to an American firm. But finding a deal to sell TikTok was always a long shot. TikTok's likely worth hundreds of billions of dollars. ByteDance raised money at a $300 billion valuation just in November, even with the U.S. ban on the horizon. So there are very few companies that could afford it. Even if both sides were willing to make a deal, the Chinese regulators would probably block it. Either way, we didn't get a deal. And that 270-day deadline from the original legislation, that works out to January 19, 2025, 11 days from today, and the day before President Trump's inauguration. Now, the TikTok ban was challenged in court, with the company arguing that the legislation violates its free speech rights. Those are under the First Amendment. But after the case worked its way through the lower courts, a federal appeals court upheld the law just over a month ago. And a few days later, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case on an expedited basis. They're hearing oral arguments starting on Friday. Given the timing of all this, it's worth noting that President-elect Trump, who tried to arrange something similar for TikTok via executive order when he was last in office, has changed his stance here, coming out against the ban and pledging to save the platform on the campaign trail. Last month, his lawyers filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court, basically asking them to extend the deadline so that he can directly address the ban once he's sworn in. Although, who knows if the Supreme Court will play ball. So, with the market closed tomorrow in honor of late President Jimmy Carter, I think it's worth taking a closer look at this issue before the court starts hearing oral arguments on Friday. The final briefs filed by both TikTok and the U.S. Solicitor General, who's arguing on behalf of the law, give us really a great indication of how each party will argue the case. Like I said before, TikTok's arguing that the law violates its free speech rights and the rights of the users. Their lawyers emphasize that the First Amendment protects Americans' access to the speech of foreign adversaries, even if it's propaganda. They also offered an alternative to an outright ban. Disclosure of the source of any material in TikTok, saying, quote, disclosure is the time-tested, least restrictive alternative to address a concern the public is being misled about the source or nature of speech received, including in the foreign affairs and national security context, end quote. Now, by the way, a group of TikTok creators has separately petitioned against the ban, and their case was folded into this broader case before the Supreme Court. In one of the creators' last briefs, their lawyers argued that the law is, quote, an anathema to the First Amendment because it aims to shield Americans from nothing more than potentially disagreeable mix of ideas, end quote. But the Justice Department claims that this is not a free speech issue at all. They say the law targets the national security risk stemming from China's control of ByteDance. Here's how they put it in one of their briefs. Quote, the First Amendment would not have required our nation to tolerate Soviet ownership and control of American radio stations or other channels of communication and critical infrastructure during the Cold War, and it likewise does not require us to tolerate ownership and control of TikTok by a foreign adversary today, end quote. Now, I'm not totally convinced. I mean, we didn't let the Soviets control American radio stations, but we did let them publish a newspaper. Justice also argues that TikTok does not have any First Amendment rights here because it's not in control of the algorithm that it uses to make recommendations to its users. They argue that First Amendment rights are not being violated by the law because TikTok would be allowed to continue if it only had a U.S. owner. The issue they stress is the PRC's ability to influence TikTok and gain access to U.S. citizens' sensitive data. And the Justice Department says that TikTok's preferred disclosure remedy won't work, claiming, quote, such a generic standing disclosure would be patently ineffective, end quote. So what's going to happen? It's tough. I honestly don't know. I think TikTok and his fellow creator petitioners can score some points with that First Amendment argument. But if the government can paint a clear picture of why TikTok is a national security threat, it probably could be able to win. Usually, given the Supreme Court's 6-3 advantage for conservatives, you can get a sense of which way most cases will break. But this is a tough case to game, given that most conservatives were strongly in favor of taking a tough line against TikTok until Trump changed his mind. That said, we'll get indication of which way the Supremes are leaning during oral arguments on Friday, because the questions tend to be pretty darn pointed. By the way, I'm also not sure if President-elect Trump's request for an extension of the ban deadline will even be considered, let alone granted. And if the court does uphold the law, it's unclear what Trump's options would be on TikTok once he takes office. It's tricky because this is the result of a law passed by Congress. It's not an executive order that can be simply reversed with a stroke of a pen. It may require congressional action to change course. And while President-elect Trump has tremendous sway with a new GOP-controlled Congress, most of those legislators voted to ban TikTok last April. We do know that if the TikTok ban is upheld, it will likely be enforced via app stores, primarily Apple and Google. Users will be unable to download TikTok or receive any updates via the App Store, severely degrading the platform. Of course, look, Mad Money's a show about stocks. So what does the TikTok ban mean for your portfolio, for my charitable trust? Most obvious answer is that it's good news, if not great news, for the other publicly traded social media platforms if advertisers are forced to go elsewhere. And that's especially true for Meta Platforms, Trust Holding, which has its own knockoff version of TikTok with Reels, which I think is pretty good. At the same time, we could see some service providers to TikTok take a hit. Oracle comes to mind. They're TikTok's main cloud technology provider here in the U.S. But no matter how this case plays out, it deserves more attention than it's getting. For the nearly 9 months since TikTok ban was passed, it feels like people have just assumed something would be worked out to prevent the most draconian outcome. Maybe investors also figured that Trump would step in after he won the election. But the bottom line? We listen and we don't judge. But here we are almost 9 months later, and it seems like the only real way to stop the TikTok ban is if they win this case before the Supreme Court. Given that this isn't really a straightforwardly partisan issue and we listen and we don't judge, I think, well, let's just call it anybody's ball game. I'm taking questions, and I'm going to start with Susan in New Jersey. Susan.
Hi, Jim. Thank you for taking my call. Love your show. Thank you to you and your crew.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm a second-generation listener. My dad always watched your show, my late father, and now I'm continuing to watch. Yeah.
I'm so glad you did, and I'm glad that your dad loved the show. That's a nice thing. Thank you.
He did, and I remember him while watching, so thank you. And I took the dive and became a new member.
Oh, fantastic. We're working hard. Jeff and I are working all day today together, trying to get this stuff right. How can I help you now?
Well, you're awesome, and here's how you can help.
Okay.
HPQ. I bought HPQ a while back thinking I would get a jump on the 3D printing. And It's really just sat flat. It's been really neutral, even a little in the negative. Friday, when everything popped, it popped a touch, but it really hasn't popped. Wondering, do I just keep holding? Do I sell? What's your take?
Okay, Susan, I think there are better stocks to own, frankly. I too, expected that we would get that the AIPC would mean more. I don't think it's going to. I would take that one. And the fact that it sells low at 9 and it's got a 3.46 yield, no, it's starting to look like that nothing's going to move the needle here. I want you to take that money out. We bought a little BlackRock today for the trust. That's a great stock. It's a different area, I know, but stocks come down 100 points. It's a really good one. Buy a small amount. That's my favorite going into earnings season. And thank you for those great words of confidence, and I will pass it on to the staff. Anyway, look, it seems like the Supreme Court is the only thing standing in the way of a TikTok ban. No one's talking about it. And since this isn't a completely partisan issue, it's really a toss-up what might happen here, but you got to stay focused. And boy, if Meta wins, Meta would be the winner, of course, if TikTok is banned. Much more Mad Money, including my preview of the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference with the top voice in the space, Lisa Gill. Then I'm breaking down the decline in food and beverage stocks. Don't miss my message to the packaged food C-suites on navigating the space of changing landscape. They won't like it. You will. And all your calls, rapid fire, tonight's edition of the lightning round. So stay with Cramer.
Don't miss a second of Mad Money. Follow @Jim Cramer on X. Have a question? Tweet Cramer. #MadMentions. Send Jim an email to madmoney@cnbc.com or give us a call at 1-800-743-CNBC. Miss something? Head to madmoney.cnbc.com.